Thank you, Chair Kresha. While you get yourself situated, Chair Kresha moves House File 779 before the committee with the chair's intent to lay it over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill or further consideration at a later date. Chair Kresha, please present your bill.
Thank you, Chair Bakeberg. And so with that, members, we've seen fraud in childcare and through the CCAP and other nutritional programs. Obviously, we are the stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And so knowing that fraud is real, pervasive, and persistent, and that victims are oftentimes caught in unsuspecting situations, and these are our parents, our children, and they're really being denied services that are intended to support them. And so one of the most recent scams involves recruiting and putting parents in a position where they might unknowingly sign their children up for substandard tutoring services and signing away their rights to tax refunds or inviting a tax audit. This is made worse when the Department of Revenue treats the parents like potential criminals rather than nonprofits, or the tutoring centers seeking these are doing unsavory tactics. As detailed in recent news reports, and you have a couple of those in your folders, we have a scheme where apparently the conduct with no due diligence on the educational partners provided tutoring or other services that was substandard. In the end, the child is denied legitimate education. The parent is essentially robbed of their entitled tax refunds, while these entities and their tutoring partners appear to be paid in full. That doesn't seem to be right. It's not right. This bill seeks to address two problems. First, the financial reality that many families cannot afford to pay the upfront cost of the educational benefits covered by the tax credit. So the first thing we have to solve is they have to come up with this money for these, and that can be a very difficult situation. Second, shutting down the K-12 credit assignment program that these entities use to bankroll their fraud. I will be the first to admit the bill is the start of the conversation. As you can see, I'm the only author. I'd love to have other authors. The advance payment option included in the bill likely has a cost that needs to be determined through a fiscal note, which is why we'll be laying this over. And there might still be a place for legitimate actors to use the K-12 assignment program to help eligible parents. So we have to get this right. This bill, based on the model established with the child tax credit, provides lower income qualifying families with the option to seek an advance payment of up to half the eligible education tax credit, and the bill ends the K-12 assignment program, which would no longer be needed if the parents effectively have the cash in hand to pay for legitimate educational expenses. The bill would examine whether the educational tax credit could be provided to eligible families through an electronic benefits transfer card that would work like a debit card, similar to how families access SNAP benefits. I should have with us some qualified House resource staff to help answer technical questions about the current tax credit, including family eligibility and qualifying expenses. And so with that, I do believe I have a couple testifiers, and as I said, I'd like to start the conversation on the bill and see if we can get some support.
Members, we have two testifiers. I will call forward Mr. Omar and Mr. Shaver. You guys can both come up if you're here. When recognized by the chair, I will ask the testifiers to identify themselves for the record and any organizations you might be representing. I will ask you to keep your comments to about 3 minutes. We can be a little flexible on the time for you. All right. Mr. Omar, do you want to go first? If you'd please identify yourself for the public record.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abshir Omar, and thank you for this opportunity. I wanted to speak on this bill because, like most of you, I read those reports from Sahan Journal and Minnesota Reformer. And it's a really unfortunate situation to see families, especially low-income families, who are struggling to get their children a better education, right? Families that understood that their children are falling behind. And it's a clear statistic in this state that our children are not doing as well as children in other states. You can refer back to the Minnesota Fed report a few years ago about reading, writing, math, things of that nature. And these parents found out about a program that is able to provide free tutoring for their children. And that's what they were told, at least, in the report, many of these families, the 18 mothers that came forward. But what turned out to be a grant program was exactly this program that we're talking about today. And basically unscrupulous people who saw an opportunity to make a quick buck, not only making a quick buck, but abusing labor all the way on the other side of the planet, right? We're worried about workers in Shein factories not making enough money. We're looking at tutors making $5 an hour for a program that's pretty lucrative when you look at it. And these parents need their tax return. They use this money for repairing their vehicles, paying for healthcare expenses, clothing, and many other different things for their families, right? These are people that live paycheck to paycheck. And when I heard about this bill, I thought this is a wonderful idea. Cut the middleman out, educate the parents directly, and have them have the opportunity to direct the funds directly without having to go through a nonprofit or a foundation and not having to rely on the service provider, like that was reported in the articles, and taking their own word and testimony for it. Is the program good? Absolutely. I think every child that needs additional assistance when it comes to their education, I think that's something that we should support 100%. Making sure our kids are able to read, do math, understand science, I think is important for this state. It's important for our workforce, but more importantly, it's good for creating a society that is, cognizant, that can critically think. I think that's a good thing for our society. But the problem is, and this is a cyclical issue that we're seeing relating to fraud. The biggest fraud that occurred in this state, Feeding Our Future, I was directly involved with. I was a senior consultant for the organization. I came in on the last 5-6 months before the raid occurred. And the funny thing is, when I joined Feeding Our Future, the first thing I did was do an internal audit. And I sent an email to the executive director highlighting 10 organizations that I thought were highly suspicious. And the first thing that happened was my access to the email server and the database was cut the following day. Then we have the raid that occurred a few months later, but before that, I held training sessions with all of these sites and all of the providers, and I said, hey, a lot of this math is not adding up. And we want to start looking at accountability, what's going on, and if you don't come to these trainings, you're going to be immediately cut from the program. Everybody showed up. Some of these things were recorded. And as you know, the feds came in and investigated and shut a lot of these people down, and some people went to jail. And the funny thing that happened was I start seeing my name being printed in the Reformer, in the Star Tribune, saying, am I involved with the fraud? Abshir Omar, a political organizer, political strategist. He was consulting for this organization. Is he part of the fraud? What's going on? And almost 3 years later, have I been called as a witness? No. Have I been investigated? No. Have I been charged in any way? No. What we're seeing is these frauds occur again and again and again, and it seems like the state of Minnesota is not doing enough to investigate, is not doing enough to find out what's going on with our tax dollars, right? And when we're looking at this article, one organization named is Darul Farouk, right? The providers for success tutoring are involved in this organization. Guess what? They were also involved in Feeding Our Future. One of the key organizers for the organization pled guilty and was charged 17 years in jail, right? What also do we see? These parents asking the Attorney General's office to investigate, and the article states what? No comment. Well, guess who's a big financial supporter of Keith Ellison when he's campaign financing? A lot of the leadership at Darul Farouk. There's a lot of questions going on here, right? People are asking what's going on with our tax dollars. How are we investigating this? How are we protecting parents, right? I don't want to go over my time, but I want to support this bill because it cuts the middleman out. It allows parents to know exactly what they're spending their money on. This is not a grant. This is an advance on your tax return. And guess what? You can spend it with the organization that helps teach your children. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. Sorry, Mr. Shaver. Mr. Shaver, go ahead.
Chair Bakeberg, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Matt Shaver. I'm the Senior Policy Director at Ed Allies. We work in partnership with families, students, educators to leverage policy to improve outcomes for kids. Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts on House File 779, and thank you to Representative Kresha for opening up space for this important conversation. As has already been noted, families got ripped off here. I want to use our time before the committee to focus on one element of the fraud that deserves this committee's attention. According to the reporting from the Sahan Journal and the Minnesota Reformer, the tutoring itself was lousy. In the wake of the pandemic's impact on student learning, Minnesota hasn't done enough to scale up statewide tutoring supports for students. There are a number of proven providers that are evidence-based operating in the state right now, like Reading and Math Corps, but they're not in every school and not available statewide. There's absolutely a need for outside of school time tutoring that's affordable so that additional support is not only accessible to wealthy families. If the intent of legislative proposals like House File 779 is to reform the K-12 tax credit in order to prevent fraud, one way of doing that is to set a high enough bar so that crooks and opportunists decide it's more trouble than it's worth to try and set up tutoring operations. A positive side effect of raising that bar will be making it easier for families to find evidence-based tutoring so their kids can actually get the help they need. Right now, the standard for tutoring for the K-12 tax credit is woefully inadequate and should be updated to include policies aligned with evidence for what we know drives learning gains from tutoring. High dosage tutoring needs to be done in person, multiple times a week, provide frequent standards-based progress reports to families, be accessible to students with disabilities. For literacy, the curriculum and instruction should be aligned to the science of reading. Each tutor should not be working with more than 5 students at a time. Tutors should be paid at least minimum wage, and there should be ongoing statewide monitoring of effectiveness and alignment to standards. Additionally, families being audited by the Department of Revenue with financial penalties hanging over their heads if they can't prove whether or not the tutors working with their children were qualified or prove that the instruction was standards-based is way too high of a bar. I'm a licensed elementary school teacher, and I had to double check just now whether fluently adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators was a 4th or 5th grade math standard. Expecting families to prove, potentially years later, that the tutoring their kids got while they weren't in the room was aligned to grade level standards or literally face a financial penalty from the Department of Revenue is frankly ridiculous. The burden of proof should be with the tutoring company, hoping to get state funds to demonstrate it as high quality and staffed with qualified tutors. And if not, they should be the ones paying financial penalties, not families who are scammed. In this situation, families of struggling students went out of their way and went above and beyond for their kids to seek out additional academic support. In addition to having money stolen from them, their kids didn't get the help they needed. That's devastating, and it's unacceptable. Kids deserve better. So we strongly encourage the legislature to raise the bar for what constitutes qualifying tutoring to make sure this doesn't happen again. We're eager to partner in determining how to align research on high dosage tutoring with policy and oversight. Again, thank you to Representative Kresha for authoring the bill. Thank you all for your service to the state.
Thank you all for your testimony. Public testimony is now closed. Members, I will now open it up for some discussion and questions, but I remind you that this bill is going to be laid over. I'll start with Representative Sensimura.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Chair Kresha, for bringing this bill. I know we always say that, but I mean that genuinely this time. I think
Really?
I read the reports and similarly was really concerned. You know, I think agreement on what the problem is, right? We know that students need support. We know students need support outside of the school day. I think we are all concerned about where taxpayer dollars go. In this case, you know, there was both fraud and that taxpayer dollars are not going to the right place, and individual families were really severely hurt by that, and that's really concerning. I have, I guess, one general question is, and this might be for nonpartisan, do we know how many families access the program like in a given year, and then how much, what that amounted to in terms of how much credit was used?
Thank you, Representative Sensimura. Nonpartisan staff.
Chair Bateberg and Representative Sensimura, Sean Williams from House Research. So the data that I have is from since 2021 from the Department of Revenue. They indicated that about 287 credits had been assigned. So that's the number of returns that have been filed. I don't have any data on the amount that represents, though.
Okay.
Anything further, Representative Sensimura?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, I would say that feels kind of low to me, right? I mean, that, I'm guessing there are more families across the state that could access that than 287. So, you know, I think that shows that there's some barriers. And then, you know, just doing some quick math, if each of those families got $1,500, you know, it's about $450,000. So not that much. You know, I guess what I'm wondering very broadly is like, and there's some philosophical differences, right? I would say, I think, if this is a public good, we should be investing in this as a state. We should be building out programming rather than doing the tax credit, right? And so what I think of is like, are we already doing this someplace within K-12, right? And so I think about, we had the after-school program grants. That was one-time funding. It's not in the base, so I think we're gonna have a conversation about whether or not we're gonna continue those. And we put 30 million into that, right? Which I think was a good amount that will impact, families across our state and take out the middleman, right? Where, families are not having to get a loan, they're not having to figure out later on if this program was certified by MDE. I think I have some general questions about like, what does a certification look like with MDE? What is the time that it takes for them to do that? Because again, if we are, as a state, figuring out where should we give grant funding to, right? It seems like on the front end, that's where we should be putting the effort rather than the certification on the back end. So I guess a question for you, Chair Kresha, I think I have two of them, is like, is the tax credit the way to go for this? Or, as chair of the K-12 Finance Committee, like, could we just be investing in tutoring programs that work across our state? And then I have a second question, but maybe we'll start with that one.
Chair Kresha.
Thank you, and thank you for the question and the comments, Representative Sensor-Mira. I think the tax credit is the way to go because essentially the parents are granting the money before it even works through the government. And essentially that's what we're allowing them to do is at the front of the step, decide where those go. So that's why I chose the tax credit.
Representative Sensor-Mira.
So then I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, and I understand like giving parents some rights and like how they want to invest the money. I think where I'm struggling is if we are are we still having to have MDE certify in the end? It feels like we're still, it feels like there's a tension, I guess, between what the family wants, right? Parents' rights, being able to choose the right tutoring for your child, and still needing some government entity to certify if that was worthwhile, if that meets the standards that we have. And, I know that we're all really concerned about fraud. And so how do we figure out that tension, I guess, between parents' rights, not wanting our tax dollars to go to waste, but then still having to involve MDE as an entity that's telling us whether or not these are good tutoring services?
Chair Kresha.
And thank you for that. Frankly, I don't have the right answer. I mean, I think that's a very good question. I have to go back. As I said, this is a conversation starter. I mean, ultimately, and as the testifier, Mr. Shaver, stated, we want the dollars to go to quality tutoring services, and we hope the parents are going to make some of those right decisions. Setting the standards up and the certification through MDE might be a necessary process to get that. I don't know the right answer for that, but I will look into that, if that's okay. And thank you very much. Love to have you help me with the bill, would be great.
Can I have one more? So
Representative Sensor-Mira.
I think one of the things that was most alarming about these articles, right, is that the families are having to then pay back. And
Right.
so, I like the approach of the advanced credit. I'm wondering, could there be some kind of, and I talked a little bit to people on our side of the aisle who know more about taxes, where they're talking about like some of our advanced credits have like a safe harbor element where people don't have to pay it back. Could we put something like that so we're not in the same situation where people are getting the advanced credit and then they're still having to end up paying the government back for the services?
Chair Kresha.
And thank you for that. And I've been thinking about that as well. And one of the reasons I like the advanced credit because it reduces the liability to 50%. I mean, there's always going to be a scenario where something's going to go somewhere the wrong place it shouldn't. And hopefully, buyer beware. We have all of that. I don't know the right answer to that, and I don't want to set it up too complicated, but we should look at that. But ultimately, sometimes there can be a loss, and that's why the 50% cuts that loss to half and minimizes that if there's an unfortunate situation. But your questions are right on and things to be considered. As I tell my kids, I wish I could take away all the bad things that happen in the world, but sometimes we can't. My kids don't listen to me either.
Representative Bonner.
I'm going to pass for the moment.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I guess I am just picking up from kind of, I guess, Chair Kresha's comments about, legislating away bad things, right? As we should, because that is our goal, and that is also really important for us as legislators in education finance, right? We want to make sure that students across the state, get everything they need to become who they want to be and thrive later. And so I think for me, I'm interested in this idea about advanced payments. So I'm glad the bill is being laid over and possibly worked on. And I have, I guess, two questions. I just want to tease out a bit, I think, of what Representative Sensimir was talking about with this kind of, I know you're getting rid of the assignment process, but like also, how do we know that, we're using taxpayer dollars in a good way, and also want to offer that in Ohio, the state came up with a marketplace with a list of providers that, parents could still choose, but they would know for sure that, using these providers would mean that they would get the tax credit back. Understanding you're having this like 50% threshold, but also as you commented, these low-income families often like don't have cash up front, right? And so we just want to minimize for that. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that.
Chair Kresha.
Thank you, and thank you, Representative Lee. All good questions, and I appreciate that. I mean, ultimately, I'm trying to get to the front end of this process, reduce the liability. The parents are going to have to choose, and they're going to have to work with the best reputable as they can. I don't know that we can entirely get in the middle of that process. We're already seeing that this has swung too far to one side, and we need to reel it back a little bit, which is why the 50% liability helps a lot and removes some of the risk. I probably don't have the full answers to what you're doing because I don't know that we're going to be able to control all the players. But if we can put this in the hands and the front end of the parents, and we can try to get them and them directing their services to the right spot, and hold, as Mr. Shaver said, I mean, ultimately we need good providers. We need them to also be good actors in this, and we can't create that. I guess I'll leave it there. I'm really discerning and thinking through what you're asking for, and I would try to see if we can button some of that up as this bill would be further worked on.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, and then second question, just shifting gears a little bit because we're talking about advance payments and giving cash to families. It seems like the families that you're trying to target here are low-income folks who oftentimes have income requirements for programs like WIC or SNAP. And so just curious also if you've contemplated whether these advance payments would be counted as income when you're considering those programs and eligibility.
Chair Kresha.
And I'm not on the tax committee, I'm not the tax chair. That the intention, it would not be. I mean, it's ultimately a tax credit, so hopefully we're not double doing that. But if I can go to nonpartisan staff, because I'm drowning here.
Mr. Williams.
Chair Bakeberg and Representative Lee, when the legislature established the child credit advance payments, there was some concerns that those might be considered income. Because they are sort of means-tested payments, they generally qualify for income tax purposes for the general welfare exclusion, meaning they're not subject to income taxes. However, I think that there has been a determination by the federal government that the advance payments of the child credit would be considered income for the purposes of SNAP. However, one difference between those child credit advance payments and the advance credit payments contemplated by this bill is that those are periodic regular, so that they occur in 3 installments under the child credit, which my understanding is that has some sort of bearing on the determination about whether or not they're income for the purposes of SNAP. So I can't speak sort of directly with certainty about that with regards to SNAP, but I think that there may be reasons that these are not income for the purposes of SNAP, whereas the child credit advance payments may have been considered income for the purposes of SNAP.
Representative Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Williams. Just also another idea to consider as you continue to work on this bill in this committee. And as you referenced, I mean, eventually, I mean, when you've put together your final plan, will this go to taxes?
Chair Kresha.
Thank you, Chair Bakeberg. I'm sure it will be. I'm sure that, we'll talk to the tax chair and see where it goes. I don't have the exact path on where that could go, but if it's going to have the T in it, it's probably going to go through that committee.
And again, this is being laid over, so. I'll go to Chair Joachim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chair Kresha, for bringing this forward. This is an issue that we saw in the last few years that needs to be taken care of, and I know a lot of folks have been working on it. And you and I chatted before that maybe you want to reach out to Representative Norris because he's been working on this as well. And I believe in the Department of Revenue, in the governor's budget proposal in the Department of Revenue, I can't remember if it's in his policy or budget proposal, they do change the assignment, that pre-assignment too. So think you're on the right track. And Representative Lee, thank you so much for bringing up the income base. Every time we do a tax bill, we really look close at that to make sure that we're not kicking folks out of programs inadvertently as well. So taxes are like a big Jenga puzzle, and they're complicated. So thank you, Chair Kresha, and thank you for laying it over so we can keep the discussion going.
Thank you, members. Chair Kresha will recognize you to briefly close your bill.
Thank you very much. And so, members, first of all, I should admit that I broke rule number 43 in my handbook of being a good legislator, and that is never try to answer a question when a more knowledgeable person is in the room. So thank you to the nonpartisan staff. And with that, members, what I would just say is I think this has merit, and I think we recognize the problem. And I would invite others to sign on to the bill or help me pass this. I think this is one of those things that could be added on that, if done right, would make a substantial impact. So with that, I would renew my motion, Chair Bakeberg.
Chair lays over House File 779 for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill or further consideration at a later date.